thank you everyone for joining us today from across the country and the world. My name is Alexander McCobin, and I'm the CEO here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc. And want to just start by saying how much I appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us today. We have a terrific virtual gathering coming up where I'm going to be joined by Stephen Morris to explore and celebrate his new book, The Beautiful Business, an actionable manifesto to create an unignorable business with love at the core. It's something that I've had the chance to read before and follow the development of since this is one of Conscious Capitalism Press's publications, and I'm just so excited for this conversation with Stephen about his new book. Now, before we get into that, as many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism and business. It's a movement of business leaders around the world working to change and improve the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement. Every week, we offer these virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and business practices of those in our network. Now, today's gathering will run for about 45 minutes. Stephen and I will be in conversation for the first 20 or 30, but then we want to transition to questions from you in the audience. So if at any point you have a question or a comment that you want to make, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org so our team can take care of it as quickly as possible. And now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Stephen Morris. Stephen helps business leaders build unignorable brands, cultures, and businesses through his work as an advisor, author, and speaker. Over his 27 years as an entrepreneur, he's served more than 3,000 global business leaders. His previous book, The Evolved Brand: How and Why to Build a Brand with Soul and Humanize Your Marketing, was published in 2019. And I am just thrilled to dive into the details of his new book, as I said, published with Conscious Capitalism Press, The Beautiful Business. Stephen, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and your book with the Conscious Capitalism community today.
Alexander and everyone, I'm just utterly thrilled to be here. And I got to tell you, the journey of creating this book alongside the wonderful team at Conscious Capitalism Press and Conscious Capitalism has been just a thrill and an honor. And as those who have birthed books out into the world know, it's an arduous process that is best done in a community of support. So deeply appreciate everything and our time here today. Really looking forward to this.
So, Stephen, before we get into the book, there are some people who may know you on the call right now, and some who maybe don't really know you as a person and your background. I'm wondering if we could start not by having you recite your resume, but tell your story to everyone. What's led to who you are and what you're doing today?
Yeah, great question. Well, all great stories start with once upon a time. Once upon a time, I was an artist and a business person. I founded my first business back in 1994 when my wife and I moved out to San Diego, where a city where we knew no one. And we sort of took our pioneering from the East Coast in Washington, D.C. and really what I thought I would actually get a job out here. And the reality was that San Diego wasn't quite as mature as a town as I was used to working in big cities on the East Coast, and ended up forming a business at that point. It was a creative agency, and built and grew that agency over the years. It turned into a creative agency, a brand strategy group, and then a marketing group. And then I sold that in 2017. So I had this weird confluence of artistic background. I'm trained as a painter, a fine artist. I'm trained as a psychologist, but I'm also self-trained as a business person through what we call the School of Hard Knocks, and running businesses for 25 plus years, and helping to work now with the business leaders around the globe. And I've had the honor to work with, I don't know, more than 3,000 business leaders and 250 brands. And the work that I do now is really, it's sort of in the confluence of three things, one of which is how business strategy connects with brand strategy, which connects with culture strategy, and then the activation of all those things. So I work as an advisor, I work as an author and a speaker in those particular realms. But my main day job is as a consultant and advisor. and I'm still an active painter. One of the pieces behind me is one of my pieces of artwork. So that's the short version of my story.
A, love that painting in the background. I didn't realize that was something you had done. Wow. And second, I have to ask, since you have training in fine art, who are some of your favorite artists that have inspired you?
Yeah, I'm trained under the school, what we call the New York School of Abstract Expressionism. I actually worked with a protege of Mark Rothko. So that particular school of abstract expressionism, which would include Mark Rothko and a series of other artists there in New York, that we, if you go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, you're going to see all those folks. And so it's everyone from Picasso to Rauschenberg and a number of other folks. And my favorite artist these days, I'll say, is Ah Wei, who is the Chinese artist, who is, I think, just an amazing global thinker. He is bringing artistry and artistic thinking to a broader perspective, and especially on a political scene. So I would say Ah Wei is my current favorite artist.
I'm such a fan of Ai Weiwei as well. And, I want to follow on this thread again before we get into the book, actually, because I think for a lot of people, they might think having an artistic background and having a business background seem a little incongruous with each other. What was it like for you to go into business being an artist? And what are your thoughts on the connections or the complications between the two?
Yeah. Well, I'll fully admit it's an unusual circuitous path, and it's probably abnormal or at least unusual for some people. But when you really get down to it and you think about, or when I think about what is an artist and what is the role of the artist in not only creating pieces of art, but also shaping society, you can break it down to some key tenets. And so one of the ways I think about the role of the artist is to devise a sense of mastery over whatever their craft or medium is, and then create pieces that are intended for audiences to move them, to get them to think, to get them to feel, and get them to see the world in very unique ways. So when you take that out of the world of, say, poetry or painting or music and things like that, and then begin to potentially apply it into the world the way that the business leader thinks, the tools and the approaches are more or less the same thing. While the tools might be different, the mindset of the artist, which is, what am I intending to create, and who am I intending to create it for, and what version of my own mastery am I bringing to that to help shape, improve, and change the world. This is also the role of the business leader and the entrepreneur. So I think there's a direct parallel, and probably a quite unusual one, where we're invited now as a business leader to think about themselves as a human artist, to create works that impact a large number of people, including the people inside the business and outside the business. Ideally done with the intention to create more of a sense of awe, more of a sense of transcendence, more of a sense of beauty, and to improve the lives of people, to help them, as I mentioned before, see the world in different ways. So I think there's a direct parallel, and I'm trying to weave them together, certainly within the beautiful business.
So that is a great segue for us to start talking about your book. And you might have actually started to answer this question, but tell us a little bit more about what led you to write The Beautiful Business in particular.
Yeah, yeah. So as you mentioned earlier, Alexander, the previous book that I published, called The Evolved Brand, there was a chapter in that book called The Beautiful Business, or A Beautiful Business, I think is what was called. And another author friend of mine, we were reviewing each other's work prior to publication and giving each other feedback on it. And she said, "Hey, wait a minute, wait a minute. What is this little chapter called A Beautiful Business? Tell me more about that." I could see in her eyes that it kind of piqued her curiosity. And the reality was, for those that have written books, sometimes you're formulating early ideas and you don't actually know what you mean by them. And so I put it down on the page, and I had an outline of what I sort of meant by that. So the first reason that I wrote the book is that curiosity was really about her curiosity of, what does that actually mean? Because it was, I think, disarming for her. It was unusual, and also it piqued her curiosity. And so it was one of those things I just couldn't get out of my head. I kept thinking about, well, what does a beautiful business mean? What does it mean to the world of business? How can this affect the lives of business leaders? So the first reason is that it sort of haunted me like a wild animal, and I kept thinking about it. The second reason is when I think about, and a lot of the work that I do with business leaders, one of the things that I hear that is often unstated is they're looking to create something that is lasting, viable, and stands the test of time. And at the same time, differentiates them from, say, the comparables or competitors out into the world. And so, the beautiful thing about the attribute of beauty is that it's subjective, so that any business leader can then define what they mean by beauty, and their audience can define that on their own terms as well. And so the second reason was I wanted to serve business leaders and helping them think differently about how to create a lasting and durable and sustainable business, and use the attributes of beauty to do that. And I think the third reason really had to do with the times that we're living in right now. We're clearly faced with some times that are, I would say, and not that I've lived for centuries, but in my lifetime, it's an incredibly difficult time to live in. There's a lot of strife in what we do. There's a lot of infighting. Our culture is certainly, there's a heightened anxiety about it. The big quit and the great resignation that are happening right now, the polarities that we have between us versus them in not just political spheres, but in other sort of belief system spheres. I think we're looking to corral around something that brings us all together. And so one of the things that I see is in the world of business, there's this macro and micro type of thing happening. And what I mean by that is, in the micro side of thing, a business or business leader has a great deal of control over, for instance, the culture that they create, the innovation that they birth out into the world, how they create their products and services, how that relates to sustainability and environment and things like that. But often how it serves people and serves a particular sense of community. And that community can mean the cultural community, the community of their audience, or the larger community in which their business either serves or works within. And, so this third reason really has to do with, how does a business think about how it positively impacts in a sustainable way the ecosystem of their community structure, and how do they build something that both has this lasting impact and affects in a positive way society at large, and begins to, I don't know, heal, if you will. One of the things that I love hearing and talking about, a friend of mine, Gene Early, talks about the role of leader as healer. And I think that in the business world, business leaders have that opportunity to be a healer for some of these things that are societal issues. So really, all of it comes down to these acts of service. And Alexander, in the way that I approach the service of the work that I do in my consultancy work, and I wanted to serve business leaders in a greater way to help them create greater impact in all the things that they touch and all the things that they can consider touching.
So, with all pun intended, I think that's beautiful, and just so appreciate that, Stephen, and what you're doing in putting this out there. So, so in the book, you talk about human artistry as a concept, and I'd love for you to explain a little bit more about that for everyone listening, and especially how that applies to business leaders.
Yeah. The human artistry, or another way to think about that, if people are put off by that term, or this idea of business artistry, is really about the idea of, we humans, one of our unique abilities is to imagine possibilities and bring them into fruition. So the subtitle of the book is An Actionable Manifesto to Create an Unignorable Business with Love at the Core. So when I began to think about, well, what is an actionable manifesto, or what is a manifesto to begin with? A manifesto is this idea of creating a new belief system or a new value system, and sharing that out with a wide range of people, but putting that into action, actually manifesting, making real these things that we imagine. again, the beautiful condition of humanity, of our human ability, is to imagine things, to imagine and live in this world of possibilities, but also to make them manifest. And so you think about even just, you know, capitalism or our economic systems. These are invented systems by humans for humans. And so the act of artistry, as I talked about previously, is this mastery over whatever your medium is with the intent to move people. And when I think, from a business artistry perspective, we can think about how an artist brings their whole self and their mastery and the collective. If you go back to the Renaissance, Michelangelo, for instance, didn't create certain things on his own. He had a team of people that were creating things. I think a business operates from the same way. And the mindset that as we, as a business leader, can imagine these things into being and then create a world or affect the world in positive ways, these are acts of artistry. And I believe that, what I would love to do is make the invitation for people who are comfortable with this term to begin to ask themselves, well, if I were a business artist or if I were a human artist, how would I approach then my business differently from both a regenerative, a manifesting oriented, a creative, and a sustainable manner that does so in the way that it improves the world of people, moves them, transcends life, transcends not just their intellect, but how they feel about certain things. And what I've seen in working with lots of business leaders, when they put that particular lens or view on, because the artist sees the worldview quite differently than people who consider themselves non-artists, they all of a sudden change what they believe is possible. And so my invitation to folks would be to say, how then would my own version of human artistry or business artistry show up differently in the work that I'm doing? And how would that affect the company that I'm running right now? And I think it's just kind of a beautiful invitation. Now, I understand that some people are not going to be comfortable with that term. Maybe you call yourself a creative. Maybe in the business world, a business innovator is the right way to say that, and people are more comfortable with it. I love the idea of artistry because it actually is intended to move people.
Thank you, Stephen. And again, that just highlights the intersection that you're presenting between artistry and business and how that infuses everything that we can look at in our lives. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And that actually ties in with what I want to follow up with, in that this is not a normal business book. It incorporates so many different elements to highlight its message, including poetry and art in the book as well. Can you talk a little bit about your goal in creating this book as a designed experience for the reader?
Yeah, I love that question. And I would add a couple other things for those who haven't read or seen the book yet. Certainly, it was my intention that I wanted to create a book not only that was beautifully read, and that had great language in it that moved people and even a sense of poetry to the language, but also was fiercely pragmatic. And so this fusion of sort of this artistic and poetic mindset, which is laced throughout and within the book itself, designed in such a way that people feel it as much as read it, see it, and understand it, but also then overlaid. There's a whole chapter in the book that talks about the psychology of business. And, to be super clear, I'm as much a humanist psychologist as I am a human artist. And I believe that understanding what drives, what motivates people, what makes organizations tick is equally important to how we go about shaping the world. So my intent with it was to fuse together the fiercely pragmatic and the outcomes that organizations are looking to achieve with the imaginative realm and the creative artistic realm to imagine greater possibilities and even a level of audacity of what they're looking to achieve. And so the book fuses together those things, and it's much more of a why-to book than a how-to book, but there's a whole bunch of how-to tools within it. In fact, the final chapter is all about how to think differently about the outcomes that you can invest in and create for your business. And some of them, I talk very strongly about conscious capitalism and the outcomes that we would measure within the world of conscious capitalism, as well as the world of B Labs and B Corp and other types of organizations. But ultimately, I want people to be moved by this book. I want them to feel it as much as understand it. I want them to really ask deeper questions about their own business and how it applies to their world, so that they can take the reins of the future of their business and create something that's not just beautiful, but utterly sustainable and lasts, stands the test of time, and maybe even creates a legacy.
So actually, Stephen, building on that, I know that you've got the book in the background. You probably have another copy there with you. Would you be willing to actually share one of the poems from the book with
Oh,
us
sure.
that you
Yeah,
really
let me dig
enjoyed?
one up. Yeah. It'll take me a minute to find it. So there's
Well,
a
while you do that, I'll just remind everyone that I've got a few more questions for Stephen, but we're gonna turn it over to Q&A from the audience soon. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can in the time slot we have, respecting Stephen's time.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting this question, but there is a poem from David White in here that I will read. The poem is, I'll show the book to you guys. This is the page from the poem. And I've had the pleasure to work with David White over the years, and being involved in his program called embed, which is all about conversational leadership and asking beautiful questions. So the poem is Working Together. We shape ourselves to fit this world, and by the world are shaped again. The visible and the invisible working together in common cause to produce the miraculous. I'm thinking of the way intangible air past its speed round a shaped wing easily holds our weight. So may we in this life trust to those elements we've yet to see or imagine, and look to the true shape of our own self by forming it well to the great intangibles about us. And again, that's a poem called Working Together by David White. And the quick story behind Working Together is that David does some work in organizational life, and he wrote this poem as a commemoration piece for work that he was doing at Boeing for the launch of a new aircraft. And so the reference in that poem about, I'm thinking of the way intangible air, when traveled at speed over a shaped wing, can easily hold our weight. But really the poem is about how we as humans bridge together the both unseen forces that we work with and the tangible elements, such as the resources and the human beings that exist around us. And I think it's just an incredibly poignant poem about how we can, as human beings, work together, either as different businesses in a collective environment like conscious capitalism, or in our own businesses, and work together in both the seen and unseen forces that we're always playing with.
That was magical. And I will say I'm in Pennsylvania, where there's a winter wonderland outside, and so hearing you read that and looking out at the woods with the snow covering it just really connected with me. So thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Very good.
Now, let's talk a little bit about not just business but society. And I'm curious if you can share what you see as the role of business leaders in helping shape society and create a beautiful future for everyone, building on these principles.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful question, and I'm happy to respond to it, and I will stop short of standing on a soapbox saying what I believe other business leaders should be doing to shape a society. I have beliefs that if one is willing to raise their hand and step forward into taking the mantle of a greater future and having some role over shaping what that future is, then I am all for it and support business leaders for doing that. I also understand that most business leaders are head down and focused on day in and day out challenges that they're faced with and growing their own business. But I do think that the business leader always works within a construct of wider community. And this could be a business of any size. So I'm imagining that on this particular conversation, there's businesses out there that range from solopreneurs to maybe Fortune 100 companies. And we can imagine the vast difference between those types of sizes of businesses and the potential effects that they can have in their communities that they work within. So there's a few areas that I think businesses should be thinking about or could be thinking about and paying close attention to. So the first question I would say, from a community standpoint, how are they affecting, how are they shaping an internal environment that affects the community of the people that work for the organization? How are they improving the lives of those people? How are they shaping a community that allows those people to bring their best selves to work and then take that best self into the home environment and have it be a beautiful symbiotic relationship? So that's sort of the first question. Then we expand the sort of the ring of the trees out and say, okay, for that business that has now thought about how do I affect the immediate people who work inside the walls of the business, metaphorically, how now do they affect the next ring on the outside of the walls of the business? That could include the world of their partners, the world of their investors, the world of the people that are supplying, if they're in the game of, drawing from natural resources, how are they affecting the environmental sustainability elements? And I think there's a series of very delicate and thoughtful questions from a business strategy perspective that could and should be asked from that particular realm and even potentially measured. And then the next realm has to do with your question, which is the greater society at whole. And that could be your micro society, which is your neighborhood, your community, or your region, or it could be the national society or even the global society. And so I think the bigger the business is, especially for those businesses that are global businesses, I think they have a great opportunity to think about what role are they playing to shape the future of the global society, and how does that play a role in this symbiotic relationship that, like it or not, realize it or not, we are all part of. So the one beautiful thing about, which I wish we all come to the awareness of, is that we humans are both inextricably connected to one another. And that means our personal family, our work family, our community, and our global society. And we're also inextricably connected to the natural world. So, the paradox of humanity is that we are both uniquely ourselves, but as humans, we require other people to survive in this world. So as Darwin put it beautifully, the power of our species has been our ability to adapt and collaborate. The more that we can collaborate with the societies around us, all those communities that I just described, the healthier our business will be from a sustainability standpoint, and the healthier our global society, or whatever society you want to touch, will also be. So I state that more as a question and an invitation rather than a here's what you must do.
Thank you, Stephen. And one more question for me before we get to Q&A from the audience. We've got a bunch rolling in now. But from your decades of experience working with so many business leaders, I'm wondering if you can share at least one example or a story that exemplifies this evolved leadership and how you've seen this put into practice in a business.
Yeah. So there's the story I love telling is a company that I've had the honor to work with over the past 4 or 5 years. And I won't mention their company name because they're privately held, and I just respect that utterly. But let's just call them a company that is in the real estate industry. They build and create communities. They foster communities. They've been in business for 115 years. This year, they're celebrating the 115th anniversary, and they have reinvented themselves over and over and over again. They are, in my opinion, the epitome of a beautiful business. Now, what has sustained them over time? Even though they've reinvented themselves and innovated through different types of industries, the thing that is constant within this particular organization is that they put people first, and they do so through a value system that is lived day in and day out. It's not the kind of values that just are put up on the wall. In fact, I don't even think they have values stated on their wall. I know they have a value system that everyone in the organization not just understands, but lives by and holds each other accountable for. But they integrate this sense of community and service first for their residential communities and they live the values so that it's this both and people first of the organization and the people that work within the organization, and people first from a community standpoint. And I will say that the leaders of this particular organization are utterly comfortable with chaos, or a version of chaos that most leaders aren't comfortable with. And they're comfortable with the chaos because they trust their team members, they've hired the right people, and they want their best self to come forward. And so they give them plenty of latitude to go out, serve, and innovate and create this beautiful culture and beautiful organization that they have. And it's worth saying they're incredibly profitable. They're constantly growing, and they're growing into new cities and new parts of the country. And there is a line of people, even today in the Great Resignation, that want to work for this company. They have no shortage of employees, but finding the right ones is always top of mind for them. So again, I won't mention their name, but I just think they're a really incredible organization. And I'll tell you this, one of the things that I love about them is that they ask great questions of one another. I have a saying that goes, tell me your questions, or show me your questions within your culture, and I'll tell you what your culture is all about. Their questions are open-ended, they're supportive, they support and sort of infuse more curiosity. Like, one of the questions that they ask is, are we being comfortable or courageous with a particular decision? And so through that particular lens, it sort of instructs how then they can potentially go out and create more courageous and innovative types of things. And then they have other questions that have to do with, how are we serving? What does great service look like? What does serving people look like? Things like that. And so they turn their core value set into a set of questions that makes for an exponentially beautiful culture.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that's a great illustration and want to jump into questions from the audience now. So, first off, Corey Blake, thanks for joining us, Corey. It's great to see you again, who you've worked with a lot through Roundtable Companies to publish the book, loves that David Whyte poem, and is curious for those who read The Beautiful Business, what do you most hope that people will do differently once they've finished the book?
Yeah. Thank you, Corey. Great to see you here. Um, what I hope is that if they read it, as they read it, that they will start with the end in mind. Even though the last chapter is all about outcomes and the ways to think differently about your outcomes, I think how you define, shape, and focus on those outcomes, you can set a set of outcomes that actually creates a whole different set of culture, a whole different set of opportunities for the organization. So that's the first thing I hope they do, is they think differently about their outcomes and they start with that end in mind. And then secondarily, what I hope people do and what I hope people really get from the book is understand the integrity triangle that I really feel strongly about, which is the fusion of business strategy, culture, and brand. And when those things are operated from an integrity standpoint, you have a very strong business that is built on an incredibly strong foundation. So what I hope people do is think more deeply about what is our integrative system between our business strategy, our culture, and our brand, and what are the gaps that we can then shore up or identify areas for improvement within that. And there's tools and tips and ideas within the book that help people do that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. And David, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Benetti, I think, is wondering, he loves the concept of the concept and thinking, where do I start within our organization to begin the transformation? A similar question, but from a different angle. How does an organization begin a transformation in this direction?
I think it has to start with leadership and what I call evolved leadership, leadership who is putting people first. If that doesn't happen, then you can talk about the integrity between all kinds of things that we can potentially try and do. But if you don't have the support and not just support, but really the driving force behind leadership in order to do that, then you're probably gonna stall out at some point. So, evolved leaders are the ones that pave the pathway. They're not the ones to create all of this. They actually, some of the best situations that I've seen in organizations that I've worked with is that the leader gets behind what they're doing, but then they step out of the way and then they let the team run certain processes, especially when it comes to culture, brand, and marketing, things of that nature. But the leader has to be fully on board with this approach to let's investigate what a beautiful business means to us, and this incorporation between the business strategy, the brand, and the culture, and how those things fuse together.
Thank you, Stephen. I think you're starting to inspire people in the audience to get a little artistic themselves and use some poetic language. Because I really appreciate Linda Wendeling's question. Have you found that the hard edges of traditional business can be worn away and softened like a river rock? And how do you sustain your own beauty while waiting for the edges to succumb to the more powerful force of goodness at heart?
What a just absolutely gorgeous question. Um, Yeah, it just kind of brings me to tears. The more we bring our full humanity to the work that we do, which speaks to hardening the soft edges and even, getting playful with that particular language and thinking about, you know, we talk in the business world about the soft skills, which are really the more difficult things that have to do with the human complexities. Um, the idea of bringing these more, or these less tangible, these unseen forces, and all the power that they hold, even though they're very difficult and sometimes impossible to measure, the more that we can bring that part to ourselves and to the business world, the more we actually invite that of other people. I have seen organizations infuse a higher sense of poetic language that it it changes the conversational landscape within businesses. Um, I forget the exact terminology, but David White was asked a question about, well, was made an invitation early on in his career, and somebody said to him, you should take your poetic sensitivities into the world of work. And he asked the question, well, why would I possibly do that? I mean, what is the value of that? And the gentleman said to him, we don't have the language to deal with the complex elements of our humanity in the typical vernacular that happens at work. And the beauty of the poetic sensitivity and even the language mindset around that is that it actually opens up our door to a new set of poetic language that broadens not just our vernacular, but when our vernacular broadens, our view broadens. And when we can invite ourselves into this much broader view of what does it mean to be human at work? What does it mean to no longer check oneself out the door and bring wholeness into work? All of a sudden, the world of poetry begins to open up avenues for us to have deeper, more fruitful conversations around the humanness that exists inside of work.
That's beautiful, Stephen. And you just mentioned in the last question that it starts with leadership, but Chris Linkle is wondering, in the spirit of human artistry, could you share some of the most effective ways you've seen that leaders can inspire their employees to be their authentic selves and to go on this journey as well?
Yeah. I think that the best way I've seen that happen is that they show up and be vulnerable and be fiercely vulnerable. And, we know that in the world of business, most of the culture, regardless of the stated values, will model or remodel themselves after the way the leaders have behaved. So leaders set the tone for behavior and attitude and things of that nature. So when a leader can show up and be vulnerable, be seen as vulnerable, take risks, show up and maybe not have all the answers to all the questions, maybe even talk about, I don't know the answer to that. And really, truly, day in and day out, demonstrate that there's an openness to see their humanity, to be vulnerable and not knowing all the questions, the more that has a trickle down effect. Now, the one thing I will say within that, and I've seen it happen, is that takes time and patience. The leader just can't show up and in week one say all of a sudden I've gone through a weekend of vulnerability practice, and they have to practice it themselves, and they shouldn't expect within the next 2 to 3 weeks that their entire team is going to show up in the same way. So this takes practice, this takes time, this takes patience, but I do think it begins with modeling the leader's behavior at the top, which will then become contagious in a very positive way throughout the culture. And then also cheerleading that leader, cheerleading when that person, he or she, recognizes when other employees are showing that same sense of vulnerability, calling that out and saying, well done, beautiful, keep that up, keep going. I love that you're doing that.
Amazing. Thank you. Chris Cooper has a question. He's read your remarkable book and applauds you for it. He wonders, is there a route to a beautiful business through embracing the world of artistic impression over and above the nice pictures on the office wall?
Oh,
What's the
goodness.
deeper way for this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Chris, great to see you here. Thank you for your question. Yeah, I mean, actually, it really isn't about what the walls and the halls look like. Although I'm an advocate for beautiful environments because it replicates the emotional sensitivities that the culture actually has. I actually don't think that organizations should start with redoing their office decor to create beauty. I think that beauty and it's probably worth even talking just for a moment about what do I mean by beauty. So when I talk about beauty in the framework of the book, I am borrowing from the Japanese aesthetic principles of beauty, which is not the cosmetic and fashion industry, physical adornment type of things. It's the felt sense of beauty. And it is things that have integrity, symmetry, things that are aligned with the natural resources of the world, things that are aligned with nature. And this version of beauty is not only unignorable, but it's a felt sense that becomes contagious through an energetic system that happens within the business itself. So this inner beauty, as people begin to communicate how we have either good or difficult conversations with one another, how we hold meetings, how we hold each other accountable, how we build trust, which is the currency or the emotional currency that all organizations trade in. Those things are as beautiful as anything you could possibly see on the wall. So I would begin with those deeper seated things, begin with the roots first, and then let the tree grow and let the beautiful fruit flourish within the organization. That might be the walls and the halls.
Amazing. Thank you, Stephen. I think we have time for one more question from Joel Hodruff, who says, beautiful business leadership is certainly critical, but is it sufficient? What about updating economics? And do you have any thoughts about this concept of holistic systems change, which he thinks is an idea whose time has come?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think holistic business change, including the economics of the way we handle things like sustainability, even leadership training or cultural training, things like that. All the spreadsheets. These things should be woven into the mindset. So when we think about the economics within a business or how one measures a sense of economics within the business, I think it ought to be incorporated within the whole. Again, beauty is about wholeness. It is about orchestrating all the parts so that they are aligned together as much as possible in a sense of integrity and, whenever possible, harmony. But sometimes, the cool thing about harmony is that harmony doesn't happen when everyone's singing the same note. Harmony happens when there's a little bit of dissonance, when I'm singing like this and then somebody else is singing just an octave higher or lower and things like that. So it's not, like minds don't always agree, but great cultures are a fusion together of some different opinions that then mold this thing together. And I think the economics are part of that. And I think even sustainable economics, and I know that Conscious Capitalism recently produced a book called Conscious Wealth, which is a book that I just absolutely loved. And he talks about what conscious wealth actually means. He talks about it more from an investor standpoint, but I actually think it's applicable even into the economics of the business world.
I think you're absolutely right there, Stephen. And so just want to say thank you so much for writing the book, for coming and sharing it with us today, and want to see if there's any final comments or wisdom that you want to share with the audience before we wrap up.
Yeah, massive gratitude to you and the entire team at Conscious Capitalism, Conscious Capitalism Press. It has been an honor to work with you guys. So a couple of things. So, here we are at the end of the year, and I realized, because I'm running some of these retreats, is that business leaders are beginning to think about, well, what have we accomplished up to here, and what is our strategies moving forward? And so I have a couple of questions that I would encourage people to think about, and then I'll leave you with another parting thought, which is how to reach me. So first question, which I think we talked about earlier, which is, have we started with the end in mind? So in the organization, as you go off into your retreats, have you really started with the end in mind? And what does the end in mind actually look like? And how does that tether into your higher purpose, your core values, and what you see as the vision for the future of your company for however long you want to project that out? To what extent have we gotten crystal clear about that trilogy of things, which is the fusion of business strategy, brand, and culture? And what are the potential gaps that we see, or integrity gaps that we see within that particular system? And then the last question, which I think I mentioned to you already, which is, to what extent are we leaning towards comfort over courage? And what is the degree to our audacity to show up as our courageous best self? And so it's those three questions I would leave you guys with, maybe the retreat oriented questions, and certainly ways that people can get up with me if they're interested in the book. If they haven't yet read the book, they can go to the-beautiful-business.com. My website is matterco.co, Matter Consulting. So it's matterco.co.
Again, Stephen, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We have links to Stephen's website and the book in the chat to the side. We also have a link to a 30-second survey we'd love for you to fill out before you leave to help us plan future programming like this that you find valuable and that will help you in your conscious capitalist journey. And if you're new to conscious capitalism, please visit consciouscapitalism.org/start-here for more information about our movement and organization and how to get involved. With that, I want to say, hope you all had a great Thanksgiving holiday, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all in next week's virtual gathering. Thanks again, Stephen.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Alexander.